Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator at Murder by the Book in Houston, and we're super excited for tonight's event. But before we get into bringing authors out and get them introduced, I figured I would make just a couple of general store announcements while everybody's getting the notification that we've gone live. So as I mentioned, I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. We are open again for browsing, so if you haven't been in to see us in a while, come visit us. We just got in a bunch of signed books. We've got signed copies of the new Brad Thor, Daniel Silva, Susan Elia McNeil. We're expecting signed copies of the new Megan Abbott and Martin Walker in next week for their releases. So if you haven't seen us in a while, come visit us, come say hi. We're still encouraging masks in the store, but we have lifted the limit of 6 people in the store at a time. We are also always available at murderbooks.com. So if you're not getting out yet and you want to order online, you can do that. We're still offering free media mail on all of our orders over $75. And you don't need a code for that. Once you hit $75 in your shopping cart, the free shipping option will pop up. And of course, we're always still doing curbside pickup too. So if you're not getting out just yet, or if you were getting out and have now decided not to with the Delta variant, if you are more comfortable with curbside pickup, you can always give us a call when you are heading our direction, and we're happy to run books out to the car for you. So tomorrow night, McKenna is going to be back with us, and she is going to be chatting with Ben Winters and Richard Lang. So that's what we've got going on for the rest of the week. But tonight, we're super excited to have Brian Freeman back with us for his new Ludlum book. And we're super excited to have Tom Colgan with us. If you guys have been watching any of the virtual events, you will have seen Tom commenting and asking questions. So we're super excited tonight to have him in conversation with us. We're going to start tonight by bringing out Brian Freeman. How are you tonight, Brian?
I'm doing great. Thanks
so much for doing this with us again.
Absolutely. Always great to be back there. Wish we were in person, but hey, we'll get there soon. So
Yep. So for anyone tuning in, so Brian's new book is called The Born Treachery, and Brian Freeman is the best-selling author of more than 20 novels, including the Jonathan Stride and Frost Easton series. His Audible original, The Deep, Deep Snow, hit the New York Times audio bestseller list. His novels have won the International Thriller Writers Award and the Macavity Award and have been finalists for the Gold Dagger, Edgar, Anthony, and Barry Awards. We've been lucky enough to get to chat with Brian a couple of times throughout the pandemic. So if you missed any of his previous events, if you want to hear him talk about his previous Born book or his most recent standalone novel, you guys can always just scroll back through our Facebook feed or the YouTube channel, and all of those events are still up there to watch. As I mentioned, his newest book, The Born Treachery, just came out Tuesday, and we do have signed book plates to go with it. So now I'm going to bring out Tom Colgan. How are you tonight, Tom?
I'm great. Thanks a lot, John. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for doing this with us.
I'm really happy to be here. It's very exciting.
So as we were talking about before we went live, Brian said even though he and Tom have worked together on several books, this is the first time they've gotten to meet face-to-face, which is one of the fun things about being able to do these virtual events. So we're super excited to have Tom with us. So for those of you who don't know, Tom Colgan is the Vice President Editorial Director at Berkley. He started his career at Berkley in 1985. In those days, he worked on everything from the novelization of the movie E.T., The Extraterrestrial, to Westerns. He then spent 6 years at Avon, Morrow, and returned to Berkley as executive editor in 1996. He has worked with such best-selling authors as Ed McBain, Janet Evanovich, Lee Child, and Tom Clancy. Among the New York Times best-selling titles Tom has edited are The Last Man Down, a firefighter story of survival and escape from the World Trade Center, Hardcore 24, and Tom Clancy Enemy Contact. So he definitely knows his stuff, and we're super excited to hear him chat with Brian about the new book tonight. So while they are talking, if you have questions for Brian or if you have questions for Tom too, please post those either in the live chat on YouTube or the questions on, or the chat on Facebook, and we will get to those in a little bit. I'm already seeing some familiar faces pop up, so I'm going to let you guys get to it, and I will see you in just a little bit.
All right, thanks, John. So Brian, I'm very happy to see you face to face. I do kind of wish it was not kind of, I definitely wish it was in person, but
exactly.
You know, what can you do?
That's right.
Maybe next year at this time, we'll see.
That's right.
All right, so I want to get right to it. I think the easiest way to get started is, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about the plot of The Born Treachery?
Yeah. I'm so excited to have this second Jason Bourne book available right now after last year's The Bourne Evolution, and it's always it's always an interesting experience writing a second book in a series. And obviously there have been many Ludlum Bourne books over the years, both by Ludlum and by Eric von Lussbader. But having sort of rebooted the entire series in The Bourne Evolution and kind of started the series over in some ways, the second book is always an interesting challenge, and I had a lot of fun putting it together. I always like to kind of grab the reader by the throat with the first chapter, and with a Bourne book, that's so much fun because you're dealing with that sense of distrust and betrayal that is so much a part of who Jason Bourne is, and I always like to be able to kind of set the opening of the book in a place that readers might not expect. Last year in The Bourne Evolution, I started the book out in Quebec City, a wonderful, great romantic location, and of course bodies start falling left and right. And so this year I picked the walled city of Tallinn in Estonia, and it's a really important scene. The book starts 3 years earlier, and Bourne and his partner and lover Nova have been called in for an emergency mission in Tallinn, and they're attempting to get a Russian double agent, a Russian spy who's been working with the Americans, safely out of Tallinn and back to the U.S. because his cover has been blown, and they're dealing with a new assassin that is at risk, and they find out that he goes by the name Lenin, and of course you'd think, well, he's tied to Russia, it's Lenin, but no, this assassin actually he's going after John Lennon, so he spells it Lennon, and so it's a chapter in which I wanted to be able to sort of demonstrate Bourne's distrust of the people around him, and how he can't be sure that he really trusts the CIA that has brought him in. And I also wanted to be able to dive into his relationship with Nova and how important that relationship is in his life. And this mission that they're brought in on fails spectacularly, and it kind of sets the tone for the whole book, because 3 years later, when the narrative kicks off, Bourne has gone through a lot of changes in his life. Nova is dead in a mass shooting incident that happened before the beginning of the Bourne Evolution, and he gets called back in by the same CIA person that brought him into Tallinn, and this time Lenin is back and is targeting an American politician who is in London for the meeting of the World Trade Organization, and right from the get-go, Bourne is wondering what's really up here, because the things he's being told don't seem to add up. And so as he sort of plays this cat and mouse game with Lenin around England, he increasingly finds that he really can't trust anything that he's being told. And he begins to learn that that original mission in Tallinn was very, very different from what he'd been told in the beginning.
Well, isn't that sort of the essence of the Bourne, the nature of Bourne is that, or the Bourne books is that it's always wheels within wheels within wheels within wheels, All right. So speaking of Bourne, there are a lot of legacy books out there, whether it's Clancy or it's Cussler or it's Ludlum. Why do you think that people are so attracted to these?
Yeah, it really seems like they've been growing in popularity, and I think obviously when one project is successful, it tends to breed other projects as well.
Yep.
I think it's such a natural desire on the part of readers that they want to see these popular brands and these iconic characters continue. I mean, obviously, here we are in 2021, and you can still find books and movies and TV shows going on about Sherlock Holmes, and I think it's because these characters end up occupying not just a place in the reader's imagination, but I think in some ways they become like friends to them, and they don't want to see the story of these people end. They want to be able to see it keep going. And so when you're talking about an iconic hero like Bourne, I think that people want to kind of find out what happens next for him. But I think for a series writer, that also creates an interesting challenge, and that was something I felt when I was working on The Bourne Treachery. When I wrote The Bourne Evolution, the first book, in some ways, to me, it kind of felt like a tribute novel to Ludlum, and that I wanted to resurrect and reboot this character. And I had a lot of sort of tips of the hat to the original Bourne identity in the novel. But when you get to the second book, it's kind of a different dynamic because you need to start moving the character forward. I don't think these legacy books would be popular if the characters don't continue to grow and evolve and change, because that's what makes them real. That's what makes them three-dimensional. And if Bourne never changes and you simply drop him down in the middle of an action plot, I think readers are going to get tired of that pretty quickly. I mean, you need to have the personal essence of Bourne, because that is what has always attracted him to readers. So in The Bourne Treachery, I was really thinking through, how does Bourne evolve and grow and change as a character? And you almost have to start giving yourself permission to kind of take the character forward, because when I did The Bourne Evolution, I felt like, okay, I'm bringing Ludlum's character back to life. Great, fine. I had a lot of fun with that. Well, now it's sort of it's a different feeling, because I kind of end up feeling like, well, now this Ludlum and I are really sharing ownership of this character, and I've got to take Jason Bourne and move him forward and begin to make my series out of this. And I think you have to sort of give yourself permission as a writer to be able to start kind of messing with the original legacy and really make that legacy your own.
Well, speaking of that, it's interesting that you used Sherlock Holmes as an example. I thought you were going to go James Bond, which I would have done, but
which is true.
Thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But all those, both of them plus Bourne, because they've been around so long, also have a component that's not just on the page. Also have TV or movies, or so. Do you triangulate between the Matt Damon Bourne and the Bourne on the page, or how do you work that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The interesting thing.
I'm gonna mark that one. Okay.
Put a little star by that one.
Yeah.
So, well, what's interesting about Bourne is that there have been so many iterations of him as a character over the years, and literally over the last 41 years, because he first emerged in the Bourne identity all the way back in 1980, when I was all of 18 years old. If you'd told me back then as a teenager that 40 years later Ludlum's name and my name would be on the same book covers, I would have thought you were crazy. But so you had Ludlum writing 3 Jason Bourne novels, and really there's a lot of change in the character over the course of those 3 novels, and he's very much a different character at the end of Ultimatum than he started with in the Bourne identity. Then you've got I think 10 books by Eric von Lussbader taking Bourne in his directions. You've got all of those great Matt Damon movies, and actually I may be dating myself here, but I actually can remember the days when Jason Bourne was not Matt Damon, but was actually Richard Chamberlain in an NBC miniseries with Jacqueline Smith as Marie Saint-Jacques. I
remember that. Yeah.
Yes. I honestly, I loved it. Marcia, not so much, but I always enjoyed that miniseries. In fact, I had it on VHS, so if I was sick from work, that was my my treat. I would put on the VHS of the Bourne identity. But you look at that and you realize all these people have very different visions of who Jason Bourne is. Sure. And so when you're thinking about rebooting the series, it's definitely a question of how do you keep these different visions coherent, and how do you sort of keep the different audiences happy, particularly when the characters are pretty different. I mean, if you look at the Matt Damon version of Jason Bourne in the movies, that's he's a very different character than you find in the Ludlum books. Matt Damon kind of portrays him as this laconic loner. I mean, in the last movie, and there's virtually no dialogue. It's like Matt doesn't have anything to say through most of the movie, and he's he's sort of bitter and cynical and a loner, and that's really not the character that Ludlum created. I mean, when you go back to the Bourne Identity, his relationship with Marie St. Jacques is absolutely pivotal to the nature of the book, and that's true in the subsequent two books by Ludlum as well. So when I was going back there, my first goal really was to be true to Ludlum's character and to really create a version of Jason Bourne that would make readers of the Bourne Identity say, yeah, that's my Bourne. That's the hero that Ludlum created. But I also wanted to develop him in such a way in terms of his physicality, his look, his action, that if moviegoers wanted to sort of picture someone like Matt Damon, as kind of playing that role and be able to sort of put, a face to the character in the book, that I'd give them enough ground that they could actually do that. So I was trying to kind of strike that delicate balance where I wanted to go back and really make it Ludlum's character coming to life, but I wanted to be able to have moviegoers at least feel like they can kind of get a sense of Matt Damon and who this character is as well.
Do you feel like the villains are as important as your characterization of Bourne? I mean, well, yes. Tell me what you feel about the villains.
Yeah, villains are a lot of fun, and I don't know. It may be sort of me carrying over some of my psychological thriller roots that I think I put a little bit more emphasis on the villains in my Bourne books than Ludlum did, and there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, one, villains are just fun to create. In the Bourne Evolution, we had Miss Shirley, and she was just such a spectacular character to bring to life on the page. I mean, she was so much fun to write. And so now, here we are in the Bourne Treachery, and we have this assassin Lennon. And clearly Ludlum fans will see that what I was trying to do was draw some parallels between Jason Bourne's original mission in the Bourne Identity, where he was going after the assassin Carlos. I wanted to kind of go back to that a little bit and have once again Jason Bourne having kind of this cat and mouse game with another assassin. And in fact, I reference a couple comparisons between Lennon and Carlos in the book. But I think what a good villain does is it actually, the villain helps humanize Bourne, because I think what makes Bourne appealing is he's not a superhero. I mean, he's a fractured, real human being. He's struggling with his moral identity. He's struggling with the fog of his past. And so having this villain that he's dealing with, I think, sort of reinforces the humanity of Bourne, and it kind of allows the villain to kind of poke Bourne in the side and have a little fun with him in a way that nobody else can. I mean, Bourne's the protagonist and hero. You can't have him. I mean, it's going to be harder for the other characters to sort of outshadow Bourne, but a villain can do that a little bit more. And in fact, one of my favorite scenes in the Bourne Treachery is when Bourne is by the River Thames at night in London, and he's in pain and he's exhausted, and Lennon is on the other side of the river and calls him up, and Lennon is sort of taunting him from the opposite side of the Thames, and even kind of throws a line in Bourne's face that I think Bourne movie aficionados will appreciate, because he talks about the fact of, you should really get some rest, Jason. You look tired. And of course, that's what Bourne tells Pamela Landy in the Bourne movies. So I wanted to be able to throw that back on Bourne and have Lennon be able to kind of taunt Bourne in a way that nobody else in the series really can. So yeah, the villains are really important, and I think they kind of add a richness to the drama and the contest that's going on for Bourne.
So you got characters, you've got your writing, and one of the things that so I'm going to throw you a curveball. I haven't told you this before, but one of the reasons that I wanted you to write these books was that I read a couple of the Stride books, and I thought the plotting was really superior. And so when it comes to plotting, do you approach it by like looking at the character first and saying like, okay, what would this character be up to? Or do you start with like a hook? You know, you get an idea in your head like, oh, here's a hook for a really good story, and how will my character fit into that? And now, second part of this question is it different when you're doing it with your own characters as opposed to doing it with a character like Bourne, who's not really all yours?
Right. You know, it sort of the process kind of feeds on itself. Certainly when I'm dealing with, say, one of my Stride books, the very first thing I do is sit down and think about where each of the characters are and what happened to those characters most recently, and what are some of the sort of unresolved personal issues or challenges that those characters need to face and deal with. And as I start thinking about that tends to start me looking for themes and plots that will allow those things to get pulled out. So for example, I just finished off the next Jonathan Stride novel, The Zero Night, and The Zero Night deals with the fact that Serena, Stride's wife, is an alcoholic, and I felt that was an issue that I'd really not explored in a lot of detail throughout the Stride series. So I started thinking about that as the character hook for the book, and once I did that, then I started thinking about how that might ripple through a plot, and so they started to kind of feed on each other, and layer upon layer, it all came together. In thinking about Bourne, I knew a little bit of what was going to be going on in Jason's world personally, even before I started this book. I actually knew when I was writing the Bourne evolution that what kind of the first key twist was going to be in the Bourne treachery, and so I had already sort of set that out for myself when I was writing the first book, and so right from the get-go I knew that was I needed to kind of layer that into the plot that I was developing. But the same thing really applies. I mean, you know, I'm thinking about what's next for Bourne and what he needs to deal with, but then simultaneously I want to find a plot that kind of fits into that essence of his character. So he's sort of back with Treadstone, and yet he's trying to keep it a little bit at arm's length, and so that colors how the plot takes shape. And so I felt like, again, they would layer together, but it's a little bit different in dealing with a Bourne novel. Because it's more action driven, it's more adrenaline driven than sort of the psychological intricacies of some of my other thrillers. Is it different because he didn't start out as my character? I don't really think so. I think that would probably be true if I was trying to build onto what had come before. If I was writing, say, the next step in, you know, a Ludlum series, or I was writing the next step in what Eric had done. But the fact that with Bourne Evolution, I was really kind of rebooting the series, I didn't feel as constrained by, you know, the character history, because I was kind of creating a lot of new character history for Bourne, you know, right from the beginning.
Okay. What about locations? Do you start off thinking like, oh, I read this great thing about Talon and I want to set it there, or do you come up with the plot or the beats and say like, hey, what would be a good? Oh, I know a good place I could put this would be Talon.
Yeah, usually the plot drives it first. I'm thinking about what's happening, and then I'm looking for what settings would really enrich the drama of what's going on, and I want to find settings that, you know, that will give readers that you are there feel that you've been dropped down into every scene, and you can hear it and touch it and taste it and smell it and feel it happening all around you. And you know, obviously I love to be able to use places that I've actually visited, which is a little trickier with Bourne, just because it's you know, it tends to be more international and there's more scenes set outside the U.S. But so so far, I think I've been to all the places where I've set Bourne scenes.
Oh, really?
I had a day in Tallinn when Marcia and I took a Baltic cruise for our 25th anniversary. So I was able to at least draw on that when I was writing the first chapter.
Good. All right. Well, are there any influences in your Bourne writing that maybe people don't expect? You know, some other writer or some other series or something that you've read that makes you think like, oh, I could adapt some aspect of this to Bourne.
Well, you know, there's a couple. There's a couple things. I mean, one is thinking stylistically. I was always a huge Ludlum fan, and Ludlum had such a very unique, distinctive style of his own. It was very driven, very emotional, very dramatic. I remember they always kind of used to give him a little bit of a hard time about his use of, you know, exclamation points and italics. And in fact, I think it was either Time or Newsweek, I think, that did an article about a review of one of Ludlum's book, and they wrote the review in Ludlum's style with you know, a lot of exclamation points and italics, which was such a
Wow. Okay.
it was such a fun review. But so, you know, the point of that is that if you try to simply imitate Ludlum's style, I think it becomes kind of a caricature. It just doesn't work. So what I've tried to do is use my own style, but allow some of that, you know, dramatic Ludlum passion into my own approach. And so I think what emerges from that is kind of a hybrid of you know, Ludlum style and Freeman style. That's sort of a whole different beast. Are there any other, you know, writers influencing it? I think there's some influences that you might not necessarily expect. I mean, part of it is even as I'm plotting, I'm always looking for you know, hooks that will have sort of a timely or authentic feel, so that even though I'm making stuff up and even though I'm taking situations to the extreme, I want it to have sort of an echo of familiarity to the reader, that they're going to think, oh yeah, something like that could really happen. So for example, in the Bourne Treachery, dealing with this whole concept of the Russian double agent that they are smuggling out of Tallinn. Not that long ago, I read a great book by a true story by Ben McIntyre. He's a wonderful true espionage writer. So he's done a lot of books about World War II espionage, and he did a book called The Spy and the Traitor, which was about a Russian mole who was high up in the Russian intelligence agency in London, and the Brits converted him over into an agent. And this was, I think, Oleg Gordievsky was his name, and he was ultimately found out actually through a U.S. spy, Aldrich Ames, and the Brits had to do a very daring extrication of Gordievsky from Russia, and so Ben McIntyre did a great job of really outlining exactly how the Brits were able to get Gordievsky out of Russia. And so as I was thinking about that, I thought that was such a great true life story, that I thought, you know, there's some elements here that could be, you know, reworked and twisted and adapted that would sort of flavor the Bourne Treachery. And so, you know, it ends up being a very different kind of story. And yet what I want is to have that sort of echo of authenticity, that people would feel, yeah, that's the kind of thing that I can see happening.
Okay. Well, that's a really good recommendation. I'm going to look that book up. That sounds really interesting.
McIntyre's books are great, and The Spy and the Traitor are one of his best. So
I think he wrote a book about Kim Philby that I read. But
I read that one too. Yep.
Yeah, that was really good. All right. Well, we're not here to recommend other people's books, but nothing wrong with that. But people should buy those books from Murder by the Book.
There we go.
I'll put that plug in. Okay. All right. So short answer, yes or no, or however you want to answer this. Jason Bourne, the saddest secret agent ever? Yes or no?
Oh, the saddest secret agent ever. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah.
Fair enough. I'll accept that. Okay, Jason Bourne, beer drinker or martini drinker?
No, there got to be a beer drinker for Jason. Yeah, well, we're going to leave the martinis for
Oh.
Mr. Bond. Yeah, yeah. So.
Oh, I thought you'd go like the middle ground of like old fashioned drinker or something, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, no. We'll give him a good strong IPA. Yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't make that. I'm sure someone will be posting that like I dissed IPAs, but I don't like IPAs. All right. So I reserve the right to maybe come back to Born later, but I want to talk about your 2022, which is pretty remarkable. Why don't you tell us? You don't have one book, you don't have two books. You have how many books coming out in 2022?
It's going to be four book launches in 2022. Yeah, I wrote 3 books last year. I'm writing 3 books this year, and I almost feel a little guilty. I'm slacking because this is actually my last book launch for 2021. So people have to wait. Oh my God, a whole 7 months before another book comes out. So yeah, it's going to be an amazing year. The first launch is it's not a complete launch because my Mystery of the Deep Deep Snow, which I was thrilled was an Edgar Award finalist this year, and it's one of my all-time favorite books. I did a follow-up novel to the Deep Deep Snow called The Ursulina, which is about a killer hiding behind the identity of this mythical beast like Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and it's a very emotional book. In fact, I just finished listening to the audio version of it. But it's currently an Audible original, but as of February 1st, the print and ebook editions will be coming out. So the Ursulina will be available in February. And then, of course, I'm working on The Bourne Sacrifice, the 3rd of my Jason Bourne novels. So that will be coming out next summer, I assume probably right around this time again.
I will tell you right now, August 2nd, 2022.
Very
well, today, just to be.
You're way ahead.
We're breaking news here on this.
Yeah, this is news to me too, so I'm delighted. So, and then 2 more books in the fall. I mentioned the new Jonathan Stride novel, The Zero Night, and my editor at Blackstone, just got back to me, said it's stunning. So I love that book. I can't wait to have Stride and Serena and Maggie back. So that'll be coming out in October, and somewhere else in the fall. I don't have an exact date yet. I have a new standalone thriller called Girl of My Dreams, which is a really interesting out there concept, and I'm in the midst of that right now. So that'll be coming out next fall as well. So yeah, 2022 is going to be a busy year for readers, and that'll be great.
Not to mention for you.
Not to mention for me. That's right.
When you're writing a character like Stride, or to some degree Bourne, like a repeating character, do you worry about getting stale, or it sounds like you've got so many other almost you'd call them palate cleansers in between that you don't have to worry about that. But do you? Well, let's look at Stride because you've done many more Stride books. And you
Sure.
have more books. Do you like write a scene? Do you think like, oh wait, no, I've had a scene like this the 2 books ago. How can I do this differently? I mean, how do you keep it fresh?
Yeah. Well, part of it is, people will always ask me, do I know how the Stride series is going to end? Do I know what the ultimate denouement will be for Stride down the road? And I always say, no, I have no idea, because I never want to get ahead of myself. I want these characters to be, real and 3-dimensional and fresh, and they are evolving and changing based on what happens to them in the book. So Jonathan Stride in The Zero Night and the last Stride book, Funeral for a Friend, is a very different character and person than he was in my first book in Morrow back in 2005, because of all of the things that have happened to him along the way. So I never plan terribly far ahead when I start up with a new Stride novel. The first thing I'm doing is looking back at what happened in the last book and sort of using that as the springboard then for where those characters go next. And I think that's really the key is if the characters continue to grow and remain interesting and complex, then the series stays fresh and spontaneous. Are you always thinking about, well, have I done X or Y or Z? Sure. I mean, you're definitely kind of always looking to take a new take on things. But ultimately, I think it's still going to get back to the freshness of the characters. I mean, a series is not likely to die because of the plot. It's much more likely to die because of the characters. I mean, ultimately, they're what's going to kind of keep readers interested. So
that is a great line. I'm going to have to remember that. That is a seriously good line. Yeah, that's very good. Do you one of the not arguments, but one of the discussions I have a lot of times with authors who are writing series is, okay, author might say, should I hold this idea for the next book? And in general, my feeling is always like, no, just put every good idea you have, put in this book, and you worry about the next book next time. But that's easy for me to say because I'm not writing them. I mean, do you like come at times where you're like, yeah, it's a good idea, but I'm going to hold off on that?
Well, if I've got some themes or ideas that I come across. I mean, I keep a file in my phone of ideas for future books, which tend not to be completely fleshed out ideas. It's more characters and plots and twists and things, just interesting little things that I think I might be able to work with. True crimes I might read about that I think might spark my imagination at some point. But generally, if I'm thinking about a particular book, I'll try to put as much in there as possible because I want to be able to explore all those themes and twists, and I think that's what keeps it fresh and spontaneous. You always want to not know what's going to be happening next. So no, I agree with you. I don't tend to sort of hold keep my powder dry. I'm just going to try to throw it all in there and see where it takes me. Now, do I leave little hints of where we might go next? Absolutely. I mean, there were things that I did in The Bourne Evolution that ultimately now come out in The Bourne Treachery, and I've as people will see when they read The Bourne Treachery, I have certainly opened the door for some future things to deal with in later Bourne books as well. But and I don't necessarily know when I'm putting these things in a book how I'm going to work with them or bring them to life later on. But I know they've got some interesting dramatic possibilities that I can pull out in a future book.
I think the genius of your rebooting of the Bourne series was that you did it in a way. I mean, it did. Obviously, if someone had read the Ludlum books and then read the von Lustbader books, they could recognize that it had been rebooted. But I think you did it in a way that felt very organic to the character. Did you worry about that? Was your first inclination to say well, I can't reboot this, I'm just going to keep on carrying on? Or I think you always felt like I'm going to have to reboot this and make the character mine?
Yeah, I felt right from the get-go that we needed to start completely fresh and reboot the character. I think that I mean, The Bourne Identity was such an extraordinary novel. And Bourne such an amazing character, but that was 41 years ago, and Bourne was immersed in the milieu of Vietnam and Watergate, and clearly you can kind of pussyfoot around and try to kind of hint at things and ignore the timelines, and I just don't think that works. I mean, I looked at it and I said the only way that we're really going to breathe a completely new life into the series is to be true to the character, but then put the character in a completely new setting and not be reliant on anything that came before. So I mean, Bourne is still Bourne. I mean, he's still this character that has lost his memory and is struggling with that moral identity. But other than that, it's the character, but now everything around him is new and fresh, which I had to explain to readers, because obviously I had a lot of readers asking me, well, do I need to go back and read, 13, 14 books? Forget it. Like, no, just dive in on The Bourne Evolution. You're fine.
So I think what you said, a better way of saying what I said so clumsily, was that you boiled him down to his essence and you kept the essence and then built out from there.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly
right. That down. All right. Before we bring John back in, do you have movie news? And is that something you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's terrific. The first book I launched earlier this year was a standalone thriller called Infinite, and Infinite is it's far and away my most unusual thriller. It kind of grazes on the edge of sci-fi, but not really. It's on one hand, it's a very complex story because it deals with the concept in quantum mechanics of parallel universes, the idea that with every choice that we're confronted with, we make the opposite choice in a parallel universe. And so we're just on one branch of this tree that is expanding in infinite directions. And I just love the thriller, possibilities behind that, and thinking, well, what if somebody could cross over one of those branches and influence the life of an identical version of themselves? And yet, at the same time, for all of the complexities of the idea of parallel universes, it's a very basic story. I mean, this young man, Dylan Moran, has made a lot of mistakes in life. He's had a lot of losses in life, and he's really trying to find out if there are second chances possible for people like him. So it's really a quest for redemption at the heart of Infinite. When I was first thinking through the idea for Infinite, I actually had the idea of doing it as my first screenplay, and then I ultimately thought, well, no, I'm a novelist, not a screenwriter, so I'm going to do this as a novel. But I think the cinematic quality of Infinite carried through into the book, and we had a lot of movie interest in it right from the get-go, and so we had a couple studios going back and forth, which was fantastic, and ultimately Universal Studios snapped up the rights to Infinite, and we've got it's being produced by Chris Morgan of the Fast and Furious franchise. And we've got a couple terrific screenwriters working on it, and they've been very gracious about kind of keeping me in the loop and letting me be kind of the fly on the wall watching this process. And they just really get it. They really understand the book and the character, and I think the whole thing seems to be, this is Hollywood, so you never know what's going to happen. But right now they're all in, and in fact the folks at Universal bumped the screenwriters past the outline phase directly to the draft of the screenplays. So that's terrific news. So watch this space, keep your fingers crossed, but we'll hope we'll see something on the big screen in a couple of years, because I just would love it. I mean, I think Infinite is it's something that really belongs in the movies. So we'll hope
that is super exciting. And I love the thought that in another timeline I'm eating ice cream right now, but I'm happy to be here talking to you nonetheless. Are you a science fiction fan? I mean, what prompted you to? That's a little bit far afield from what you usually write.
It is. It's a big departure for me. I'm sort of a fan of certain aspects of science fiction. I was a huge fan of the remake of Battlestar Galactica, and I
absolutely
I enjoyed it so much because there was so much moral depth and complexity to the storylines, and to me it really showcased what great science fiction could do. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that I wanted to be able to try in Infinite. And frankly, what I love to do is just push off in new directions. I mean, you talked about palate cleansers, and for me it is this. I love the diversity of the projects I'm able to work on. I can put down sort of a mystery with a female first person narration, and then pick up an adrenaline thriller like Jason Bourne, and that's what really keeps me energized.
It really is amazing that A, you have the opportunity to do this, and B, that you have the talent to do all these various things. Because I'm not at all impugning other people's talent. It's just most people are, they write one kind of book. They might write different characters, but it's one kind of book. And you're just, all over the place, which is really terrific. It's very exciting.
It's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying being able to do such interesting and different projects, and that's what jazzes me up every day. So
good. All right. So let's bring John back in here. I think he's going to bring in some questions from the audience who are sick of hearing from me. By all means. So.
So saying that, so the first question I'm going to ask is actually for you, Tom. So, people always want to know like how authors get picked to do like the Ludlum or the Clancy or the Robert Parker series. So as the editor, how does that happen? Do you have people in mind when you're thinking about it, or do you kind of put out a call and let people audition for it?
So what happens is, so this is right in my wheelhouse, because I do the Clancy series, I do the Ludlum series. Now we've started doing W.B. Griffin books, and it's sort of my bailiwick, right? So what happens is, my boss says, "Hey, we have this opportunity to do these Ludlum books, and I know you're great at this. You probably have someone in mind already." And I say, "Oh, absolutely." And then I go back to my office and say, "Who am I ever going to get to do this book?" Like, I cannot imagine I'm ever going to find somebody. And so, I mean, honestly, in some instances, I do have a vague idea of somebody who, like, I've met or I've read his other books or whatever, and then I think about that. And in this case, I had not read Brian's books before, but I honestly don't remember like how his name came into the conversation. But I was like, okay, so I went off and read a couple of the Stride books, and I was like, wow, this guy is great. This is exactly what we're looking for with Bourne. And I was very lucky. And what happens then is I go to like Brian's agent and I say, hey, would he be interested in this? And then I talk to Brian, and then we knock together like a little, bare bones idea, and he'll write like 2 or 3 chapters or something, and we'll show that to the estate. Meanwhile, I've said to them like, hey, this is the guy I'm thinking of. Here are some of his books. Why don't you read them and see what you think? And then when they, have approved the tryout, then we get going on the actual book. But I've been very lucky because I've been able to find a lot of really good authors, and I'm just so far it's worked out. So I got a good feeling about some others who are coming down the pike, but it's fun. It's fun. It's really fun working with all these authors. So.
And so then when like you get the call, hey, we're looking for, a Ludlum, and so you're potentially going to have to edit a new one. So then if you're not familiar with them, do you have to go back and like reread the other ones in this series so that way you know a little bit more about that world?
Well, I mean, I'm familiar, first of all, just like Brian, I'm, I guess, the same age. I read all these Ludlum books when I was in high school. I remember exactly where I was when I was reading like the Chancellor manuscript, and actually, honestly, don't tell anybody else, but I actually like those books better than the Bourne books, the Chancellor manuscript, and what's the
Chancellor manuscript? Great. I just listened to the audio of Chancellor manuscript a couple months ago.
So yes, I had read those books, but of course I read them 40 years ago. So, my recollection of Bourne was much more of the movies. So yes, I did have to go back and like go through them to see like what, exactly was happening then. So far, I've yet to been called upon to do something that I absolutely didn't know, where it was just like totally new to me. I had to go find, but that might happen. And I guess, I just go back and read some of the author's original books, but with Clancy or Griffin or those, I'd already been reading them pretty thoroughly up till now, so I'm not good on the detail. Like I will defer a lot of times. Like I will absolutely forget that like this character was born in Brooklyn as opposed to Brookline, but that's what we have copy editors for. So
so Brian, with Joshua Hood also writing in kind of the Ludlum Bourne world, do you check in with him to see about like whether he's using characters or locations and things to make sure that the stories are what's the word I'm looking for? Cohesive?
Yeah. Josh has become a good buddy of mine, and we text back and forth a lot, and we've done a bunch of events and things. And I think that we in the first books, in both of those series, the first Treadstone book and the first Bourne book, we were trying to make sure that we weren't kind of stepping on each other's toes, and Tom was great about being able to kind of point out where I want, some things, I could tweak some things so that it reflected and was complementary with what, Josh was doing in his version of the Treadstone universe. I think we did less of that with the second books because I think now, as the series, mature, we end up kind of going off in our own directions. I think there's, less concern that there would be any sort of, overlap or contradiction between them. Now, down the road, do we actually go the other way and look for opportunities to, to bring Bourne and Treadstone and the Treadstone series closer together? Who knows? That might be kind of fun. So we'll see what happens.
Seems like that would be like a fun, those short stories that they do before a new book comes out, or like those anthologies that ITW does.
Right. Well, it's kind of like, when they'll occasionally do crossover episodes between two TV series, and part one will be on the one show and part two will be on the second show. So who knows? Maybe Adam Hayes and Jason Bourne will take that approach someday. So
we had a question from the crowd. Brian, was it easier writing this Bourne novel after you had the first one under your belt?
Oh, good question. Was it easier writing the second one after having the first one under my belt? No, it was actually a lot harder. The Bourne evolution flowed. I mean, it just it just came right out of me, and it felt like such a smooth process. And the early going of Bourne Treachery was much harder. I was really just kind of struggling to get my head around it, and it took me a while to understand why that was. But I mentioned earlier in our conversation that you end up realizing that you need to give yourself permission to take ownership of these characters, because I think with Bourne Evolution, I was still thinking of Jason Bourne as Robert Ludlum's character, and I was rebooting Ludlum's character in my book. That's different now when you get to the Bourne Treachery. Now he started with Ludlum, but now he's a Brian Freeman character too, and so I needed to be able to kind of let that open up and be willing to move Bourne forward based on the things that I was doing in the series. And I think once I figured that out, then everything kind of started falling into place, and it I kind of understood what I was doing. But it took a while to kind of get that epiphany, and in the early going, I felt like, this was much harder than Evolution.
Yeah. So there were only, as we mentioned, there were only 3 of the original Bourne books that Ludlum wrote, and then Van Lustbader's done them, and some other people have kind of played in the world. Did it make it harder with there only being kind of 3 books that Ludlum did himself, or did it make it easier since you're so far removed from kind of that original creation?
Yeah, I think it wasn't necessarily so much the quantity, but the time involved. You figure that, the Bourne Identity came out in 1980. Supremacy, I think, was 10 years later, and Ultimatum a couple years after that. So really, it had been, almost 30 years since Ludlum had written a Bourne book. I think that gap in time was so long that it made it easier to be able to feel like, okay, we're just going to start over and use the essence of the character, but reboot in a whole new storyline. I think if Ludlum had been writing Bourne books 3, 4, 5 years ago, it would have been very different. And at that point, I probably would have been thinking more about, okay, how do we build on the series and the plot lines and storylines that he created versus starting and kind of creating a whole new universe around Bourne.
So Susan asks, this is a great question. She says, I'm certainly not suggesting this happen, but could you imagine Bourne retiring, and what would that look like? I don't see that happening. But what's funny is really, if you go back to Ludlum's The Bourne Ultimatum, Bourne is pretty close to retired in The Bourne Ultimatum, and I mean he's aging as a character in that book. Certainly at that age wasn't going to be pulling the kind of martial arts stuff that he was doing in the Matt Damon movies. So yeah, can I imagine Bourne retiring? No, I don't think so. Do I imagine him wanting to settle down? That's definitely a part of who Bourne is. But I mean, that desire is a strong part of his psyche. He would like to be, living at home and with Abby LaRon raising kids.
But that kind of happily ever after, that's just not in the cards for a character like that. And that wouldn't, readers might say they want that, but that would be
So Cami wants to know, will there be a third book in the Deep, Deep Snow and Ursulina series?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. And I certainly, I never say never about these things. But I don't think so. At least at this point, I'm not planning a third novel, partly because the emotional cohesion of those two novels is so tight and so extraordinary, and the ending of the Ursulina just it just brings the two books together in such a way that I think trying to put a third book on top of that would feel sort of emotionally artificial. So when you read the Ursulina, I think you'll see how these two books are just absolute, even though they're totally separate plot lines and really mostly totally separate characters, they are so closely linked. I don't know. I mean, again, I never say never. Maybe, you know, something would come up, but at this point, I like them as being kind of a two-book set. It just feels emotionally right that way.
So Dave wants to know, Brian, are there any other genres that you would like to explore as a writer?
In my spare time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, I mean, I've got so many slots open. In my, well, it is true. Would I love to do historical fiction? Yes, I would. Would I actually love to write a nonfiction book of some kind? You know, would I love to work with somebody on a memoir or biography? Yes, I would. Will that happen? Yeah, we'll see. It is certain. There is certainly not much time for exploring other projects currently, but you know, that for me, that's part of the fun. I'm able to really explore, you know, new genres, new characters, new storytelling approaches. So I would never say no to anything. I'd love to continue exploring different areas, and yeah, that might include, you know, new genres and you know, very different kinds of books. So we'll see what happens.
Awesome. And so Tom, Brian also threw this to you. So are there any genres that you would like to play with from an editor's perspective?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I do love science fiction, but, you know, I'm not. You know, we are actually sort of more siloed than authors are, even, you know, as editors. You know, that's not my deal. You know, we have science fiction editors that are really good at it, and it's not that they wouldn't welcome me to say, like, hey, I've got the science fiction book I want to do, but it would be really awkward, and I wouldn't know. And I would know what I like, but I wouldn't know, like, if it was, you know, maybe some other book was like this already or whatever. So you know, in a completely free world, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing some science fiction. I wouldn't mind doing some history. I love history, but, you know, I'm good at what I do, and I'm going to just keep doing that. I'll stick with that for now.
Okay, so Brian, Donna asked, she says, do you love having Tom as your editor, and do you tap into his COVID journal for the most dramatic parts of your books?
Who's that? Get out of here.
Donna, I love having Tom as my editor. You know, I mean, Tom and I work so well together. It's great. I've had a chance to work with a lot of different editors over the years with very different styles, and I really appreciate the touch that Tom has in terms of thinking through, you know, plots and characters and stories. We work really well together. As for his plague journal, that is sui generis. It is a world unto itself. So I think ultimately it needs to be, you know, bound and published as a manuscript on his own. So
it may be sui generis, but you were muy generous for saying that about it.
So for anybody who's watching who's not familiar, can you tell them a little bit about it?
Oh my God. Yes. So when we went home from work last March, I thought we were home for 2 weeks. So I started writing on a steno pad, this thing I called the Journal of the Plague. And every day I wrote a little something about what was happening that day. And now we're 504 days into it, 3 days into it. And I posted on Instagram and I posted on Twitter, and it's become kind of a thing. And if you want to look at Tom Colgan 14 on either Instagram or Twitter, and you can catch up on them. But they're ending. They are ending on day 550 because that is the day we go back to work, and that is the end of it. So I'm looking forward to that.
So Brian, Teresa asks, and hi Teresa. Teresa's one of our when we have signings in the store, one of our regular faces at all of the thriller signings. She wants to know, have you been asked to continue the Ludlam books beyond the 3 that you've got now, or will have the next one comes out?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. That great question. Yeah, I'm signed up for books 3 and 4 for the Bourne series. So 3 plots already developed, and I'm already kind of getting my head around where we might go with number 4. So yep, you'll be seeing more Jason Bourne in the next couple of years.
Awesome. All right, so we are just about time. So, but before we go tonight, you guys mentioned. Brian, you mentioned the Ben McIntyre book, but for each of you, what is something that you've read lately that you loved? Let's start with Brian.
Oh yeah, well it is kind of funny because I've I've been listening to my own books on audio recently. I listened to Scott Brick doing the Bourne Evolution. I listened to January Lavoie doing the Ursulina, and I'd never listened to my own books on audio before, so I had a lot of fun doing that. I really enjoyed it. So that's an odd recommendation, but I thought the narrations were terrific. I have very eclectic tastes. I'm currently reading a biography of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. So it's kind of from the sublime to the ridiculous. But I love exploring kind of different little nooks and crannies of history and biography and memoirs. And you just never know when you're going to come up with things that sort of spark your imagination for thrillers.
Yeah. Scott Brick's great. As you mentioned, your audiobook narrator. We've been lucky enough. He's come to Houston a couple of times when Steve Barry was in town.
Nice.
And yeah, so and like they got to talk about the process of audiobooks, and then like we got treated to like Scott reading from the book in the store. So it's been fun. It's always a treat when he comes in.
Oh, he's terrific. Yeah.
How about you, Tom? What's something that you read lately that you loved?
You caught me looking up a title. Not a book. I mean, I know the book. I just couldn't remember the title. So the cheating answer would be, I just this last weekend read Sierra 6, which is next year's Mark Graney book, and it is. But I don't think I can really use that. That's cheating. The book I was looking up was, I've been reading Carol Lenig's book about the Secret Service, which is really good. It's a nonfiction book about the Secret Service, but I can't remember the title of it. That's what I was just trying to look up. So it's an excellent book about the history of the Secret Service, basically sort of starting like around the time, well, actually a little bit before the Kennedy assassination. And I'm really enjoying it. So I would recommend that, except I can't recommend it because I can't remember the title. But
what was the author's name?
Carol Lenig. I think it's Leonnig. She just wrote she and her partner just came out with a book about President Trump called what's the one?
Oh, I can't fix it. I alone. Okay,
Yeah,
so the other one is Zero Fail: The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service.
That is exactly right. Yes.
Perfect.
I recommend that.
Awesome. So I think that's going to wrap us up for the evening. So just to recap, if y'all tuned in with us late, we have been chatting with Brian Freeman, whose newest book, The Bourne Treachery, just came out Tuesday. We do have signed book plates for it. So if you haven't ordered your copy yet and you get one from Murder by the Book, we'll have a signed book plate in there for you. And we've been chatting with his editor, Tom Colgan. If you missed any part of our chat once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive them so you can rewatch them. And while you're there, search around. We've had a lot of really great virtual events. Recently, you'll be able to check all of those out. Brian, Tom, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been a blast.
Thanks a lot. I've had a
Our
lot
pleasure,
of
John.
fun.
Thanks so much, everybody. Good night.
Goodbye.